Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast number 24. In this podcast, my guest is Stephanie Carr. She is the Sustainability Manager of AART Architects, or you can find them on AART, DK with double A. Yeah, it was very interesting to talk about a different topic. She is consulting architects to make different decisions which have a big impact. So it was a pretty interesting conversation. I suggest you to listen to it. And I want to thank you before we start the podcast because our social media platforms are growing. The community is growing. You are fantastic. So I can always say thank you. Keep supporting by going on Instagram at TCI Podcast, Facebook, The Creative Insider, or LinkedIn, The Creative Insider. Yeah, so thank you very much and enjoy the conversation.
The whole world stops just like that. The whole world stops just like that.
Hello, Stephanie. How are you?
Good. And how are you?
I'm pretty good. Just back from work in a rush, but we managed to be on time here for the conversation, so I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, successful end of the working day, I guess.
Successful connection between Frankfurt and Denmark.
Yeah.
Are you actually in Copenhagen or?
No, I'm actually in Aarhus, which is
You're based in Aarhus.
yeah. So that's the second biggest city in Denmark. So
I have a colleague. He studied in Aarhus.
Yeah?
He's what for the Danish standards, it's a construction architect.
okay, yeah. So
I've in the past I've seen some. I wanted to apply for a job in Denmark, and I saw you have this construction architect and designing architect, and I always wondered what I am.
those are the guys who actually know how to build stuff and how to draw it. Yeah. So they're pretty helpful, you could say.
Very good.
Yeah.
So, first of all, you can introduce a little bit yourself to the audience.
Yeah, I can do that. My name is Stephanie, and I work as a sustainability manager in an architectural company called AART Architects. And I work with sustainability, basically, as an engineer. I don't know if there's anything.
Well, this is a good point to start our conversation. I think that's great. So, first of all, you said yourself you're an engineer, but when you started studying engineering, did you already think that you wanted to go in this direction to work together with architects for sustainability, or just how this thing developed in your, let's say, career from the beginning when you took into the path of studying engineering?
Yeah, I was actually starting out thinking that I was going to work with concrete structures, structural engineering, basically. And then I started, and I found out that it wasn't really what I was interested in. But then, thankfully, we had some other courses that were more my kind of engineering, you could say, which was more into the indoor climate and energy calculations. So then I just I changed focus during my education, and that was possible. So that was really great for me. I don't think there are a lot of people who know exactly what they want to do when they start out.
I think in the field of engineering, it's pretty open because,
For sure.
I mean, engineers are used in every field of any industry. So I think for you, it's pretty open, guys. But also for architects, it's also very open. So, yeah. And after how you so you studied for 5 years, I guess, as for engineering, and
Yeah, kind of. I did actually spend 6 years studying. In Denmark, we have this degree, which is a sort of a professional bachelor, which is basically a bachelor of 3.5 years instead of 3 years. But then you spend half a year in internship. So you go out for half a year and you work in a company and you do engineering stuff, and then you get merit for that in studies, and then it just takes half a year longer. And then if you want to, you can continue on to be a master's degree student, or you can finish there and just go into working. So I did one of those as a bachelor, and then I continued on with my master's degree afterwards. So, and then I spent 2.5 years on that one. So 6 years in all.
and so you're when once you had figured out that you wanted to go more into the whole energy aspect of a building and the whole calculation, um, did you change your ideas of a master degree? So was your master degree more focused on that directly, or?
Yeah, for sure. I started out in the sort of civil engineering bachelor, and then I sort of focused that a bit towards indoor climate. We have some courses that we were able to choose, so I chose indoor climate courses. And then for my master's degree, they have one which is civil engineering, and then they also have in DTU, where I went to Technical University of Denmark, we also have one that is called Sustainable Energy, which is kind of an umbrella master's degree for different kind of study lines, you could say. So you have for electronics, you can go and bio and management and civil engineering. So all of these different ones have sort of some common courses and then some spread out courses. And mine was then focused on energy savings, it was called. So more about buildings, but then we also had something about energy systems and stuff like that, and feasibility studies. So that was actually quite interesting to also have a master's degree with colleagues or student colleagues that were from different backgrounds. So I actually quite enjoyed that, it was a really good mix of people. Lots of international students as well.
From where?
Oh, they
From
were
everywhere, or?
from everywhere. They were from France and quite a lot from Italy and Greece, actually, and there were a few from Egypt and everywhere in between, you could say. So it was a very, very diverse group. People came from
I wanna
everywhere.
I want to make a little step back, just
Hmm?
because our conversation is focused also on enlightening a little bit your path for other people who might want to uh, take similar steps in their life, or to, if they're in the field, to move further on.
Yeah.
So how was I'm curious, because I asked that almost everyone who was on the podcast. How was the procedure to get into the university versus a bachelor and then as a master in Denmark? How does it work there?
Yeah. Well, I went to high school. That was like the first step. So you have to kind of have a high school degree, and then it also really helps to have courses in math and biology and some of these natural sciences, you could say. And then actually, I think you can basically just apply. I grew up in Norway, so I didn't actually go to Danish school system before, but it was no problem. I just applied and got in. Basically, there wasn't that high a degree requirement to get in, so it was manageable. So
But
yeah.
so are you Norwegian or are you Danish, but you
Oh,
just live in?
that's a very complicated question.
Well, my background is very complicated too. I'm
Yeah,
born in Bulgaria. I raised up in Italy. Now I'm living in Germany.
yeah,
So it's the same thing.
yeah, yeah.
I think it's pretty common nowadays to have a very international background.
It is, and it's really cool. I think to be able to,
Yeah,
speak
you,
multiple languages from the beginning and everything. So
you have definitely a brighten horizons. But is it very different Norwegian to Danish? Because the rest of Europe, we have this very, I don't know, simplistic idea of the Scandinavian that they're
They're
very
all the same.
similar.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
the same, but they're very similar. I think there is sort of a connection also because I've read something about the flags that they're the same because it's Scandinavia,
Yeah.
like the shape of the cross.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, it's muddy waters, you could say. I mean, it used to be all the same, right? And it's been going back and forth. And Norway was under Sweden and under Denmark. And so we have a very big sort of shared history and also identity, I guess, with all the Vikings and stuff.
So you didn't have any culture shocking by moving back to Denmark.
No,
Let's say.
actually, back to your other question, my mom is Danish, and my grandparents lived in Denmark for all my life. So I'm used to coming to Denmark from even before. And then my dad, he's from England, actually. So they met in Norway, where I was born and grew up, and did all my sort of basic education, and then applying to university in Denmark.
And
So
that's also pretty interesting background. And when you were finished with your university in Denmark, how did the transition from university to the professional world happen?
well, it was kind of a step-by-step thing, basically, because I had student jobs during basically all of my study years. So once or twice per week, I would go to a company and work, do whatever I could, more and more as I progressed in my studies. But I really worked alongside studies the whole time, basically, which was really, really helpful for me. I can definitely recommend working alongside your studies if it's possible.
I started in the same way here in Germany. Is it in Denmark the same that companies have to pay less taxes for all the students that are going into the office to help out?
I don't think it is exactly like that. It sounds like a really interesting system, though. No, they just pay them lower salaries, I think. So it's it's a good deal for companies, and also I think they because there is a lack of engineers in Denmark in general. So by having students, you have a good ticket for a new employee when they finish, basically, and you already train them in the system. So I think that's a driving force why many companies want to have student employees. Also because they're really, I mean, generally really good and want to work. So why not?
Yeah, I mean, general students are very motivated and they have flexible hours because no family, no kids.
Yeah.
In the main of most of the cases.
Yeah.
And what was your first company? Was it already an architectural firm? I guess. I mean, as soon as you're architects and engineers, I think it's more integrated.
Yeah, not so
just
much actually. Yeah, no, it really isn't, or it hasn't been at least. Many architecture companies have been bought up by big engineering companies lately. But otherwise, they're pretty separated, actually, when it comes to companies. So I was working for a small engineering company. It was called Espensen, and it was sort of a specialty engineering kind of gig. So they did a lot of indoor climate and energy, but very specialized, kind of. So that was definitely an interesting place to be, and it also helped guide my decision, you could say, away from construction engineering and to more sort of the softer engineering, you could say.
And sorry, by interior environment or in indoor environment, what you said, you were doing some very specific things. You were the specific like kind of buildings you were studying the climatizations for. I mean, I can think that some special buildings like, I don't know, hospitals or laboratories, or what sort of special indoor climate were you studying?
Well, in this company they did a lot of very complicated projects, but I think also, at least for the Danish system, it's a very big difference in which tools you use. Some of them are very, very simple and some are pretty elaborate. So they did use the more elaborate tools, which meant that the analysis was a much higher quality, but then they also require a bit more time maybe. So in that sense, it was a bit more specialized, but it was also, normal buildings and stuff like that. So,
Okay, so just the methodology they used was very more in deep, let's say.
Yeah, you could say that. And then also they didn't have that many construction engineers, so it was more an energy and indoor climate specialized company. So that was also, yeah.
And then you were working then for architects, let's say.
Well, in Denmark, I think they were more like it's more split up kind of. So you would have an engineer calculate some designs that the architect has done, and then they say, "Oh, we need this much air to ventilate this place adequately." So it's more like you sit on opposite sides of the table, and then you kind of reach an agreement on what the design should be like. It's not so integrated, so you don't normally have a person sitting doing both the architecture and the indoor climate calculations. I don't know how does it work in Germany.
Well, if you're working in a pure architectural firm, works exactly as you described it now.
Mm-hmm.
So you are the architect, you make your project, then you send it to the different sub company, which are general structural engineer, climate engineer, and we have also like electricity and generally water, heating, and air conditioning.
Yep.
And then of course the priority is always the design, and then you find the compromise to make it work.
Yeah.
In changing the less possible on the shape. But currently I'm working in another company which it's integrated, which means we are all under the same roof.
That makes sense, I think, or not? What is your experience with it?
Yeah, it makes sense because you have very big, so working together physically in the same building and being able to have consultation directly from your colleagues on a specific project from the first phases. It's very helpful. And I think, I'm pretty young as an architect and I'm pretty new in that company. So, but I think on the long term, architects in this kind of company get way more educated in general about how different technologies would work and how they could integrate them in their design.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if in your current company, it's working in a similar way as your engineer and as you're the manager of sustainability.
Yeah, actually, it's a bit different in that sense. I think it depends a lot on the competition. So sometimes the architect would be the total consultant as a title, which means that they're in charge of all, making all of the team work together and reaching the final product. So then the architect will be the main sort of, the main guy to move the design forward, you could say. But then you also have these other project types, which are more the contractor. So the guy who actually builds the building with all the machines and stuff, he would have the overall responsibility, and then he would hire the architect and he would hire the engineers and stuff. So just organization-wise, it differs quite a bit, and then you can have both the architect being in charge of the design, but also you can have the contractor or the engineer in charge. So it really depends on the setup.
Well, here in Germany works the same. So depending on the size of the project or depending on I mean, generally big projects are built by big firms. Sometimes they're very well educated into how the how the building process works. So
Yeah.
sometimes they have a whole department which it's in charge of this process for and hire separately all these people you mentioned.
Mm.
But there are also some big companies which just prefer to have one. They hire a consultancy architect and they hire one big company, which at least the way generally is an architect or an integrated firm and takes all the money. And if it's an architect and that's it, they then submission the different tasks to further companies, or yeah, in case they have all the knowledge, they do it themselves. Of course, the money are different in their contract. So this
Yeah,
is
yeah. So that's just a different way to organize yourself, right?
yeah, this is yeah. It's most of the time it's connected to how much money they pay you. The more money they pay you,
The more work to do.
um, the more you will do because
Yeah,
it's normal. I mean, time and money, and the
that makes
employees
sense.
needs to needs to be paid.
Yeah,
Nobody's working for free.
for sure.
Um, and so, from these first steps as a professional, how long did it took you to arrive to art, and how was your path toward this uh, company and this job?
Yeah. I started out when I finished my master's degree. I started out in a big consulting engineer company, which is called Kovi. I don't know if you heard about it. It's pretty big in Denmark, at least. But
I might have seen it because when I was a student, I was very passionate about Scandinavian architecture,
yeah,
and this is also how I found out about your company.
yeah,
And often I would go to the projects, and sometimes I don't know if art does that, but a lot of companies write who's the engineer, who did the visualizations, who did everything, and then I
yeah.
saw like who is actually. So I might have seen it, but I don't remember it, don't
Okay,
recall it.
yeah. Oh, they're a really big engineering company, but it's also kind of hierarchical. So it was very sort of top controlled. And I was just out of university, so I didn't get that much responsibility yet, which is natural. But then it was also quite kind of restraining in a sense. Uh, so actually, one of my former colleagues from when I was in an internship, he was working in a different company, which was a contractor. It's called MT Højgaard. So they were looking for someone, and he suggested that I apply there. So after 1 year in Kovi, I went to MT Højgaard, which was a completely different setup. Much better for me, for sure. Um, Much better for newly educated people in general, because from the beginning, just got a lot of responsibility. I got my own projects, and I could do all of the necessary calculations myself, which was very good for understanding sort of the whole process and how the things were fitting together nicely. And also just to be able to go to meetings and talk to the other people that my work was, they depended on what I calculated, which was also very exciting for me, at least. So that was,
And
that was a good
I
experience.
was one. I was wondering when they gave you this first responsibilities.
Yeah, that
I
was
guess
immediately. It was great. I loved it.
yeah. But did you was there some cases which you would do some mistake, and how did they take that, or you were already experienced enough not to make
No, no. I mean,
big time?
well, we had a pretty good system where we had a mentor who would, check our stuff, but then you would always be able to go and present your work yourself and do all the discussions and everything. And then in the beginning, you had a mentor who would kind of be with you on the meetings and be able to back you up when if people were asking difficult questions or whatever. And then, of course, everyone make mistakes. I mean, that's natural. And in MT Højgaard, there was a pretty good culture, at least on the projects that I worked on, that it's better just to say it immediately instead of trying to cover it up. And then, a mistake will grow and it will be more expensive to fix it later. So they always were very sort of supportive when I had to make changes, I had to make a mistake, or it's you figure out how to fix it, and then we move on from there. So that was pretty good for a new and afraid engineer. So yeah, that was a good place to start.
But I think it's a good way of learning. When I moved from Italy to Frankfurt, which for me it's already northern Europe. I had a professor in the university which was also teaching me like sustainable constructions, let's say. And he had been like teaching professor in Munich, I guess. And he told me that this is the methodology in North of Europe that people kind of throw into the water and then you need to figure out to swim.
Yeah.
So I think it's it's the best way because you can learn quickly a lot. You're kind of forced to. And from this first job, what was your next? That was your second job.
That was my second, yeah.
From there on, how did your career develop?
Yeah, so I was in MT Högskolan for 3.5 years, and I learned a lot during that time. And then there was kind of this, I don't know how to say that. It was difficult to me to get more responsibility than I already had. I wanted to do a bit more strategic work, and it was not really possible in the place where I was. And then also I had gotten together with my boyfriend, and he lived in Aarhus and I lived in Copenhagen. So that was also a bit of a motivator, you could say, to start looking elsewhere. And so then AART were actually looking for a sustainability manager. And they were mainly looking for architects or construction architects. But then I thought, why not just apply and see what they say? And evidently they quite liked the profile that I had. So now I'm an engineer in an architecture company, working as a sustainability manager. And I've done that for like 6 months or something now.
Oh, okay, so you're pretty fresh in this in the company.
Yeah, I am, and I started right in the middle of Corona, so that was awesome. Not so much.
Don't worry, I started also in the middle of Corona, like 1st of April, which is, I don't know.
I did that too. I started 1st of April.
So we both had our first day of work which to me sounds very funny because in I don't know, I think it's the International Joke Day or something like that. I don't know if it's a thing in Denmark too.
Yeah.
And sounded like a joke. Yes, I don't know if I found a new job in the middle of Corona on the 1st of April. And yeah, was pretty, scary because it was so uncertain in the beginning.
Did you have to start working at home?
No, I don't know how it was in Denmark. We didn't have a full lockdown here in Germany.
Okay.
We were supposed to go in the office and sit. We have big spots, so we're pretty distant from each other. Wear a mask when we move around. So yeah, fortunately, no cases so far. So
okay.
I mean, I know only one person among all the people I know that have gotten corona so far. So I think it's it's still not that easy to get it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, of course.
Yeah, I guess it depends on whether someone that you are hanging out with has it. I mean, then it's probably pretty easy to get.
Yeah, I mean, I'm following all the procedures they invite us to follow here in Germany. So, I mean, I have to say, I think in this situation, people need to just follow these basic rules and hope for the best. And even if you get it, not get scared because, I think in the media, they're showing all the worst cases always just to get a little bit of clickbait. But generally, it's okay.
Yeah, but I think it's also the fact that it spreads so easily. So, I mean, to keep it contained, I think it's pretty important.
I mean, now I'm going to ask you something related to this, which is a little bit out of topic, but is there any system which can purify the indoor environment of germs, which can be integrated in the future in the buildings for these kind of cases like a pandemic, or is there no such thing so far?
I mean, hospitals, they use this UV cleaning procedure for operation rooms and stuff. So basically, it's where they shine really bright light on all the surfaces, and that kills germs. I'm not really sure what it does to vira, but that's something that they use. But it's very expensive, and then it's also quite expensive to use, I guess, because it uses quite a bit of energy.
Of course, not environmentally friendly, for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. But I mean, you can design a building that makes it easier for you to take precautions that are necessary for avoiding corona. And studies also show that having a good relative humidity in the room, it actually decreases the risk of infection. So that is also something that you can think about. Is to have, for example, plants in your office, and yeah, not use the air conditioner too much, because then that dries out the room, and be careful in the winter also, because it gets quite dry. So those are some things you can do. And then when you design a building, you could also work with flows to avoid people standing very closely together. And yeah, there are some things that makes it easier.
That will be probably an interesting aspect in the next few years, because I mean, I've read some articles about the correlations between corona and environment and the whole environmental changing, climate change,
Mm,
and that probably due to this climate change, different animals gonna behave in a different way, and probably this is just the first pandemic of many others.
yeah,
Unfortunately, of course, but we need to do something about it. And yeah, maybe this will be an aspect for the future to design the buildings in a different way, because our behavior will be different. But what I was thinking, it's like you are now new in this new office, which it's mainly architectural office. What is your task as a like the environment manager of an architectural office? What is your task about the projects? What
yeah.
is your job like? What does it look like?
What is my job? It's actually pretty diverse. I have different roles in the sense that I am also sort of the only engineer. I can solve some other tasks that they haven't been able to solve before, because they didn't have an engineer. So I work, sort of my main point is to help them take sustainable choices in their designs. So that is a lot about integrated design. How do we make a facade that is passive, both for heating and also for avoiding too much overheating from the sun, for example? So that's one of the things that I can point out quite early, is that, okay, do we need to actually change the amount of glass that we have, or can we work with some overhangs or something like that? And doing that early, I think it helps the architects actually integrate it into the design in a good way. That doesn't seem sort of an add-on, which is really easy to do, I think, with the buildings. I don't know, what is your experience with that?
Yeah, well, we integrate many aspects, of course, as you said, facade and the different systems, or maybe integrate different energy flows which are inside the buildings to, be energy efficient
Mm,
also. As I said, I'm I'm very young in my career as an architect, and I have still a lot to learn about
yeah.
the different options, but from the few buildings I've taken part in, to design of. This is what is the general process. You squeeze out the best of what you can do with also the budget you have, because of
Yeah, that's
course
true. It's a big one.
because the budget of a building is very important
Yeah,
to
otherwise
make it.
it's not going to be realized, right? So
Yeah, and you have to squeeze out the best of the budget you have to make the. And I mean, currently there are also a lot of regulations which you cannot, like, you're not allowed to do it less energy efficient as
yeah,
it's required by law here in Germany.
yeah, we have similar rules here, I think. So that also helps to have sort of a pointer to are we close to where we want to be in order to actually follow these rules that are for the building. So that could be, we have rules for daylight here, and we have for energy efficiency, and yeah, so those are some pretty big ones because they're counteractive. You could say that the daylight requires glass, and then the glass adds to the heat loss, and it also makes it more necessary to cool the space. So you kind of have to find a balance between the two, and that is not always intuitive. So that is also my job, is to sort of guide them towards a design that can be completed when the engineers come and do all their calculations. So it is pretty sort of in the beginning, you could say, of the design. I just make suggestions. For example, I can say, oh, you can try to maybe place the windows a bit higher up in the facades or in the room height, so that you have glass closer to the ceiling, because that is way more efficient for adding daylight into the building, but it doesn't increase the amount of solar energy that comes in just by moving the glass upwards. And make shades towards the south. It seems a bit sort of standard things to think about, but it is really easy to get lost in the design process, because you just want to make it look fabulous and all these dreams that you have. So it's good to get sort of grounded once in a while, and you get some pointers to your design, so you can kind of narrow it in a bit more early than when you get the engineers onto the projects in the later stages. Because what I find is that when you do it later, you make a design and then you get it qualified by an engineer later on. The changes that you make, they are not so nice visually. They don't fit so well into the original idea, you could say.
So basically, you help the choices of some passive decisions. Passive by passive, I mean, like, not really changing big materials or big shapes, or just taking the basic starting design and suggest some small, let's say, tweaks, which are then with a big impact.
Yeah, you
That's
could
all.
say that. Yeah. So if we have a building plot and they have this, oh, we're looking into these 3 different volumes, then I could say that, oh, the pros with this volume is that it shades itself, or that it has a lot of facade towards the north, which doesn't have so much direct sun. And then I can sort of plant some ideas that they're actually pretty good at incorporating actually into their final design, which is really great for me to see, and it makes me feel that I'm actually contributing quite a bit to the actual design of the house, even though without saying sort of you should build it like this or whatever, just by saying consider the sun when you are doing this design, and you could consider also to put shades like this or like this or like this, and then the design is still up to the architect, but they have something more to base it on, so they can make a bit more informed decisions. And that is one of the things. But then I also have pointers to the choice of materials, so of course. So we're looking a lot into building in wood in Denmark at the moment. And that is also, there are a lot of unknowns for us as the building industry, because there are some properties with wood that are not well known yet. So how do we secure it from fire? How does it conduct sound, and how do we make the connection so that it's lasting and everything? So that is also something that I help them and I guide them with as far as I can. Otherwise, I use Google a lot. So
what a lot of people underestimate is like the impact on the environment of the construction itself. So, for example, as you said, the choice of materials in the way it's going to be built. Do you have any, let's say, do you make any guidelines for that aspects too, or are the research in that field not so developed yet to understand the impact? I mean by that, for example, if you choose to build a building in wood or in concrete or in steel, uh, itself the production of the materials for the building you're going to build and the way it's going to be built on the construction place has an impact of the emissions this building's going to produce
exactly.
in the lifetime. Do you have any do you do suggestions for that part too?
Yeah, for sure. We do these life cycle assessments a lot, actually in competition projects. We had this project that we just recently won, actually, that we suggested that they built it in wood, but it wasn't part of the competition program to build in wood necessarily. So we made these calculations that showed how much CO2 you can actually save on choosing to build in wood instead of concrete. And I think that helped us win the project, actually. So now we're going to build a wooden house, which is really awesome. Really looking forward to that.
What as you said, you won the competition. Can you already name the name of the competition and the building?
Yeah, I can. It's a small house in Aarhus. It's called Viby Syd, and it's like a community house that has both offices for some of the municipality workers, but it also has a ground floor that is open to the residents in the area. So it's going to have a cafe and some canteen, and you can go there and rent some rooms for your confirmation or for your wedding or whatever. And it's going to be a really cool project, I think, because it's also a very social, sort of including house, which is also a big thing in art, actually, that we work a lot with this social sustainability.
That's great. If you could, and after our conversation or before we release the podcast, you can send me some link that I'm gonna attach in the description. So
yeah, I mean it's on our website, so I can just send you or just show you.
So I'm gonna link the page so that people can go and see themselves what was let's say the result of your work and of your research. And in which form do you give your let's say suggestions? Do you have, for example, already do you do an analysis of the construction site itself already before the architects start designing, or they first do a first design and then you analyze directly with that?
For one of the projects that we just delivered, I looked at the site and I looked at the sort of the starting volume that they were looking into. So they had maybe 4 or 5 different volumes that they wanted to investigate. And I had given them sort of some general sort of, this is to the south, try not to have too many windows to the south and east and west. You should be careful and all these pointers. And then I commented on the volumes that they had made and helped them make an informed decision on which one would serve our needs, you could say, and make a passive design. So it could be just commenting on what they lay in front of me, but it could also be sort of bullet points as to general tip is to have side shades for on the facades towards east and west, for example. That could be like a pointer. And for this VB project that we won, which was built in wood, I made also Excel calculations which showed graphs that showed, okay, this much for concrete structure and this much for wooden structure, and so on. So that made it a graphical sort of visualization on what the difference was. I think architects in general are pretty visual people, so
we communicate everything through graphics and images.
Exactly. So I had to transform my Excel numbers into something visual, but they're really good at listening and taking it into account and also remembering it. Even there's something that I mentioned a few meetings ago, and then somehow it shows up in the design anyway, which is it's a good feeling to be appreciated in the sense that my suggestions are actually considered. So that is
that's your job. That's what you've been hired for.
Yeah, that's true, but it's not a said thing. You could, many times I've said that this is a bad idea, and then they go ahead and do it anyway. So it really depends on the people that you work with, and thankfully the people that I work with are really, really awesome, and also want to do better. You could say it's not only about how it looks. It very much in art, it's about how does it function, and does it actually fulfill the purpose of the building? And that is both with the sort of the environmental part, but very much so in the social part. So we do a lot of projects that are specifically sort of difficult, or they have a very good sense of social inclusion. So we don't only build for the building's sake. Always take into consideration which people are going to use it and what are their needs, which I find to be a very, very sympathetic way of doing architecture.
Well, I guess that this is very, very popular into the Danish architecture in particular. Recently, in the last few years, there are a lot of offices which are very strong in this aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And I live in Germany, which is also one of the most developed countries in Europe, and here also people look up to Scandinavia as the idyllic place for social and environmental successful experiments. I mean, we can say also about other projects, for example, which are pretty unique. And there is the famous Danish urbanist Jan Gehl, which he wrote a lot about this in the city, and then you've created the ski mountain in Copenhagen.
Yeah, that one is very popular.
Yeah, so it's like Sweden has Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
So it's all like in the rest of the world we have this idea of Scandinavia as the most environmental friendly countries in the world. So I think it's a very interesting aspect about how you do things there. But you also in your description as a professional, it says you're DGMB audit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Okay.
So do you use so for the people who don't know, what is it? DGMB stands for Deutsche Gesellschaft Nachhaltige Bauen, which means German Society for Sustainable Building.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know German. So.
Yeah, it's it. It is. I can tell you. Okay. It's German. That I understand.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a society which set up a standard for building in the energy level, or energy classification.
And it's similar to LEED and BREEAM, but not quite.
LEED, and what is the other one?
BREEAM, which is the UK version, which is also really, really known internationally. They use it a lot.
Okay, I
abroad.
didn't know this one. I know the lead, which is the American, which I
Yeah,
don't know what stands for. But yeah,
leadership, and I'm not really sure.
environment for sure is one of the
Yeah,
energy or
energy, I
something.
think. Yeah.
But what is an audit? What is exactly your? So this is. How did you get to be a DGMB audit? Or
Yeah, DGMB is the certification system that was chosen in Denmark by the Danish Green Building Council, which is basically it's a council. It's an NGO for sustainable buildings in Denmark, you could say, and they had this 10 years ago. I think they were founded, and then they the first thing they did was to sort of choose which certification scheme they were going to use going forward, and they chose between LEED and BREEAM and DGMB, and landed on a DGMB, which was then transformed into Danish standards, you could say. So it kind of fit our existing routines. And DGMB, it is a system where you have an auditor who can work on the project or cannot work on a project. It depends how you want to do it. And then this person guides the design and gathers documentation of the qualities of this building and rates them within this manual and this scheme for DGMB. And then the building receives a score depending on how well it does. And then it can be a silver or a gold or a platinum building within DGMB. So it's kind of a scorecard for sustainability. And my role as an auditor is to analyze on the building and rate it according to the standard. So that's my job as an auditor.
so basically, you have the license to certificate a building.
Yes, I have the license to gather all the stuff and send it into Green Building Council, who then do a third party check, and then it receives the certification. Yeah.
And another aspect. First of all, what are the different categories which are defining the score of a building? Because I've worked on a building.
Yeah.
Not very very specifically on a building. I wasn't so much involved in the project, but I know some rough information. In the past, I worked in one of my former office on the Frankfurt Frankfurt School of Finance,
Mhm.
which is a huge building here in Frankfurt, designed also by a Danish firm, company, but we did the execution.
Okay.
And in the end, the client wanted a LEED Platinum certificate.
Yeah.
That was our aim, of course, because and there were so many aspects, like I don't know, we built on the building electrical turbines, solar
Really?
panels. It's one very small electrical turbine,
Yeah.
and I think that currently they mainly don't use it because it's on the rooftop and it's too loud for the people who are working under it.
For sure.
And then there were also bees, for example.
Yeah.
So what are the DGMB aspects you have to work on to get eventually a platinum?
Yeah, where to start? There's so many things that we consider in the DGMB. It's based on the UN Brundtland Convention report, which defines sustainability in the three categories, which are the social and the environmental and the economic sustainability. So that is basically the groundstone for DGMB. And then they also have criteria that are within technological quality and process quality. And then there are 150 under points to that. So you have to answer to a lot of different stuff. So for the economic one, it could be there's a total life cycle cost calculation that you have to make. That is the bulk of it. But then you also consider the flexibility of the building and the robustness. So that's the economical ones. And then you have the environmental ones, which is a life cycle assessment. But also biodiversity is going to be included in the new manual, and rainwater, and energy consumption is also part of that. And then a really big one is the social quality. And that takes into account a lot of different qualities, which actually have a big effect on the people that are going to use the building. So it could be indoor climate, daylight, thermal indoor climate. But then it also considers whether you have designed the building so that you have nice outdoor areas for people. If you have, if it's an accessible building for people with handicaps, all of these things. And then, it's basically more of a sort of quality assurance in that sense that many of the things that they measure are things that make this building better for the people who are going to use it. So I quite like that about it, that it's measurable things, and it's not only about the systems. It's not only about do you have the most efficient cooling system, for example. It's mainly about, have you considered things so that this building is actually performing well for the people.
Something that I know is that based on what this certification has impact as costs for the client or for the developer, whoever is paying for the building.
Yeah.
How is this price for the certification calculated then for like who gets, I guess DGMB gets the money in the end, or how it works, like how it works, the pricing of the certification?
I mean, it's partially you have to pay a fee, of course, to the Green Building Council because they do the third-party verification. So of course they're going to spend a bit of time on that. But the main bulk of the costs would be improving the building, maybe, if you're not already at the point where you want to be. So that is the main cost. But then you also have to pay for consultancy hours, of course, for the auditor, and possibly also for some extra calculations for the engineer, for example. But I find that if you start early enough and you make the proper sort of decisions early in the process, there isn't really a price difference depending on which, if you want a gold or a silver medal. It's mainly about making the good choices early in the process so that you can actually implement it in the design. So a lot of the time I find that if you just take the time to kind of think, how am I going to make this building in a way that is good for the environment and for the people who are going to use it, then you're pretty far along the way anyway. So I think just making sure that you consider all these different aspects, it helps you a lot, which is also good because, I mean, the certification should be one that, that gives points for these things that are good for people. And it's not rocket science, you can add the bicycle parking because it's a good idea, or you can add it because of the DGMB system.
And is the fee for the DGMB system based on the size of the building? Because I can imagine that if you have a big skyscraper, it will be different than, I don't know, a smaller building.
Yeah, for sure. It is set up in some different intervals for the size ground floor. So yeah, it improves
for the footprint, let's say.
Yeah, like for the floor area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gross floor area.
Yeah, and per square meter, of course, it's less when it's a big building, but all in all, it's going
Okay.
to be more, of course.
And do you know if this has a big impact then on the price of the building? Because, for example, like, I mean, price not of construction,
Mm.
but I know here in Frankfurt, for example, which is the economical center, let's say, of Germany, because here it's all the banking system in Germany
Mm.
and a lot in Europe is based here.
Yeah.
And a lot of buildings are treated like economical assets. Like
Yeah.
they buy buildings to resell them, then
Yeah.
so is this certification has a big impact on a building as a financial asset, let's say.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. If that is the case, I mean, that's really good news, because that's going to make it easier for people to make the decision to make sustainable buildings, right?
I think it is because I think this was one of the reasons why some clients were willing to be informed about um, the certification, because it's more or less like when you buy a car, like if it's a very good environmentally car, they sell it, or when you buy a TV, there is the
A plus plus. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it makes sense as well, because considering where we are now, I don't expect sustainable buildings to go down in demand. It's only going to go up from here, and people are starting also to have higher demands for their tenancies as companies. I mean, it's part of their identity now. It's where they choose to have their offices. So for sure, I think it's a good idea for big investors to actually consider having sustainable buildings in their portfolio. And we can see it in Denmark as well. Many of the really big, pension funds, which are the ones that own quite a bit of the building mass in Denmark, they have requirements for certifications for all their new buildings. So it definitely it's a growing business.
And I have another question, because let's say new buildings are easier because they're not built yet, so you
Mm,
can have the interventions you want in the design process,
yeah,
and act pretty soon and efficient in with an efficient way, and have good results. But are there any uh, renowned strategies for the existing buildings, which is actually the majority of the buildings, for example, in Europe,
yeah,
because most of the European cities are based on old buildings.
yeah,
Myself, I live in a, let's say, sort of a historical building in Frankfurt.
yeah.
So, is there some strategies which can be implemented in the existing building on a scale with which we can reduce our um, CO2 footprint?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, living in an existing building, or just, reusing it for as long as time as possible. I mean, that's much, much better than to build a new, really efficient house. Um, Especially now that our energy systems are transitioning towards more CO2 neutral energy. It really makes sense to keep the building mass, so that we don't have all this embodied energy that we waste in concrete. For example, you have cement, which is really, really a big CO2 emitter in the production. So I think it's extremely important to include the existing building mass in our plans for the future, you could say. And I think
No, but
yeah.
to minimize the energy consumption of those buildings,
Mm.
is the only way just to produce cleaner energy, or are there further interventions engineering wise we could do?
Yeah, for sure.
uh, because when I was studying this this class I was talking about in the beginning in Rome about environmental construction,
Yeah,
our professor was used to say, the best energy for a building is the one that you don't use.
yeah, yeah. Of course, you have to balance it out in a way. The old buildings are definitely assets in the sense that we have a structure that we can use. And then in the recent years, I think it's become more normal, at least in Denmark, to reuse the concrete structures. So you maybe remove all the facade and you remove maybe all the internal surfaces, and then you can actually make a building that looks brand new, but you saved all of the CO2 that you would otherwise use for making a concrete structure to carry it. So that's one way to do it. And of course, there's a lot of different options for insulating. You can change the windows. That has a huge effect. We use 3-pane windows in Denmark now. And then also using a ventilation system can also reduce your energy consumption quite substantially. So yeah, definitely, I think that there are ways to improve a lot. This has been going on for some time in Denmark, at least. We've gotten pretty good at insulating, but of course there are other things that go with insulation. Is you have to be careful not to get moisture problems. For example, if you are not able to insulate on the outside of the building, and you have to insulate on the inside, which is not so good for moisture. So you have to do it with consideration, so that you get all the aspects. I don't know if because we have a lot of old buildings that are protected from the outside, so we cannot add insulation on the outside. I don't know how that is in where you are.
Yeah, well, here it's a little tricky because, for example, in Germany after the Second World War, the rest of the world was pretty pissed. So
Yeah.
there was the La Revanche, where they tear down basically everything on their way, just to break down the German spirit and to make them to avoid to undergo another war again. So all the buildings were teared down, and a lot of the buildings which are historical today, they are they've been rebuilt. Of course, they're protected, facades or protected buildings. So you need to intervene with in the best way inside and without visible changes on the outside.
Yeah.
So also, for example, if you install different machines on the top of the building or in the basement, they need to be invisible, sort of. So but I mean, those are limited amount of buildings. I mean, unless we're not talking about Italy, Rome, there would be very hard, because I think there are more buildings which are protected than the buildings that are not protected by some monuments law. So that's definitely a challenge there. But the climate there is also, in Rome specifically, is different. So it's probably
for sure
easier.
But then again, I mean, you're going to have the same problem wherever you have old buildings. They're not going to be as good as the new ones. So
no, that's of course. But I was just wondering what are the aspects you can undergo in these cases.
I think that you should always consider where does it make sense to make the effort, in a sense. So where you have buildings that are really valuable from an architectural perspective, and also that people love living in these old buildings, because they have a very, very special charm to them. All the floors are uneven, and it's loud, and you can hear the neighbor and whatever, but they're very popular because they're charming and they're old and they have a soul, you could say. And that is also values that you should consider when you think about this, whether you should tear it down and build something new, or maybe you shouldn't. So you cannot only look at the energy efficiency of a building to estimate its value, you could say.
Of course. Or maybe another strategy is to make all the other buildings more efficient so that these beloved buildings can be not that efficient as the
Yeah,
others. And
exactly. So you make the buildings you are able to make efficient, you do what you can with them, and then the ones that are valuable in other sense, you could maybe consider just creating some really sustainable energy to heat them up with. So, I mean, you should do what you can where you can, and then the sum of it is going to be better than it was yesterday. So I think that's the way to go, is a step-by-step approach.
And is there a more, let's call it net-wise approach in Denmark? Because this is something that I was also, some aspects when I was studying in the university, which were told us as the future is to consider the buildings part of a net of buildings.
Yeah.
And sort of, is there some, but what I'm wondering is if in Denmark, because you're so you pay so much attention to these aspects, if the different municipalities have sort of a master plan for that aspect too.
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, they write it into all of their plans. It always says smart buildings or smart integration or something similar like that. It's a goal that has been there for a while, but it has been really hard, I think, to implement it in praxis. But it makes a lot of sense because it makes it possible to include a lot more wind energy, for example, which I guess that Germany is also looking into. They also have a lot of wind energy because at sometimes we have negative electricity prices in Denmark. But then until recently, we haven't been able to tap that into the buildings because it hasn't been possible to get an electricity. You don't pay per the hour. You pay maybe a fixed price for 1 month or 3 months, which is then based on the average price. So by being able to differentiate the price per hour, you're able to actually make use of the wind energy when it's there, and then you can maybe save a bit when it's not there. So this is also something that is we want to implement into the buildings. But for now, I think it's not practical yet. I think a lot of people are working on making it practical. But what we can do in the meantime is to create buildings that are able to react to differentiating energy, you could say, surplus. So that is definitely something that we have been talking about in AART. How can we do this? So one solution could be, for example, having or using the thermal mass in the building to maybe heat it up a bit more or cool it down a bit more than you otherwise would, because you have really cheap and sustainable energy at your hand. And then maybe at a later point, you're not going to have that. So you can actually turn off your heating system for a few hours to sort of shift the demand. So I think that is something that is coming, maybe, hopefully soon.
Yeah, I think for sure it will be implemented, and there is all the aspect of how to collect energy. So I think that in the next few years there will be made a lot of big steps.
Yeah, and maybe also with the electricity in the cars. I know that at Technical University of Denmark and probably many other universities, they have been working on this vehicle to grid system. So basically, when your electrical car is plugged in, you allow the energy system to both charge it and uncharge it, so that your battery becomes actually part of the electricity system. I find that pretty interesting, actually. That would be really cool if we could use it.
And there will be the whole AI aspect, because probably when we were talking about historical buildings, probably AI in the future, integrated systems in those buildings will be the only thing that will be very efficient. Because if the building is very, very intelligent, exactly use the exact amount of energy
Yeah.
to create the optimal environment for the users. That will be perfect, because currently all the buildings in this way are very inefficient. Let's say we always go following the users follow
Mm,
their feeling.
yeah.
You heat or open, and that's probably one aspect of the future too.
Yeah, but I do think that we should always keep in mind who the buildings are actually there for. We don't have buildings for their own sake, It's for the people that are using the building should always be the top priority. So uh, a lot of the times, I think that we forget that people actually use the buildings, and we design it as if they were entities that should just be standing there by themselves. It would be much easier if all the users would just like not be there. Everything would be much easier. But for example, when you have an office building where you cannot open the windows, we know that from studies that occupants are very, very, very happy with being able to open the windows when they want to. But then again, it makes it really complicated to control the systems of the building. And I think until now, it has been the focus that we should just not allow people to open the windows, because otherwise the systems cannot work most efficiently. But I think that we should consider maybe that the people's health and happiness should be the most important part, and then the systems should sort of make it possible for them as far as possible to have a good indoor climate. So the buildings should serve the people and not the other way around. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, well, of course, yeah, that's what wasn't exactly the way I meant it. That was more like that all the work as you do as an architect or as an engineer is to create this whole setup for the user, which is this sort of invisible power
Yeah.
around you, which is
Yeah,
the
for sure.
design. So which makes you use the building in a specific way.
Yeah.
And of course that will be integrated, I think, with this new information sciences technologies. Like we can see it also in, I don't know, the cars like Tesla. I mean,
Mhm.
that car shows how much more could be a car with a computer, and makes all other cars looks a little bit stupid.
Yeah.
So I think this will be also sooner. I've read a few years ago that Google was working on that. The Google Home
Yeah.
will work on that aspects too. So it will be interesting, in my opinion, in the next few years. In this new position, I mean, I want to go back for your job daily on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Uh, which you're now, in this position. How exact are your calculation and suggestion based on your information? I mean, like, do you use a software to do some more precise analysis of the different aspects, and then you deliver to the architect some practical or actions you
Actually,
can?
yeah, not so much anymore. Actually, I my title in Kobe was engineer, and then my title in MT Hergård was specialist. And in both those roles, I used a lot of software and did a lot of calculations and simulations of daylight and indoor climate and stuff. And now that I'm here, I don't have the same tools available to me, because they are also very, very expensive tools, and they take a lot of time to do. So I don't really use that much software anymore. I I base a lot of my suggestions to the architects on my experience, basically. You can say a lot on the design of how is it going to work. Is it going to be manageable for the systems afterwards? You can do a lot of that on just intuition, actually, when once you have done these calculations 100 times before. So my go-to tool right now is Excel and Word and Mail. So it's very different from what it was before.
And is the beam technology very integrated in the office? Do you have any access to that, or that's your position? I mean, you're only for 6 months there, so
Yeah.
I think there will be some developments on your tasks
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No,
as soon as you.
yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
sorry.
as soon as you get more integrated into the design process, maybe
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
task will be also. I mean, you'll be given further tools, and
Yeah.
I know from personal experience that Beam has also the option to do some small analysis also inside
Mm.
of this environment. I don't know what is your experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, BIM tools that we have, they're really, really powerful and can do a lot of stuff. I have been working mostly with sort of the competition phase, and at that stage, we are not using that much Revit and stuff like that. It's more volume and yeah, just 2D drawings and stuff like that. So when the project when we win the project and it goes into actually we have to make a design that can be built, we use a lot of Revit as a main tool, and of course you have, as you said, a lot of plugins for that can be used to calculate indoor climate and daylight and so on. What we have the possibility to do within our company is to make sort of initial analysis that tell us whether or not we are on the track to having a design that is able to fulfill the requirements. But as long as we need to have the engineers to do the final calculations because of the responsibility that it entails to do those analysis. So basically, we have to have an engineer to sign off and say that okay, this is good enough for the regulations and the building requirements and all these things, because we are not able to take that responsibility ourselves. But we can always make a design that is able to fulfill the requirements using these tools, which is the best start that we can hope for.
Yeah. Another software. I mean, I can just give you here suggestion, but maybe you're well informed. There is also because a lot of designers use Rhino in the designing
Yeah,
phase.
yeah,
So I know are very. I don't know how to use them personally. I've tried to play around a little bit, but it's not that simple. I mean, you need to spend some time. There's add-ons for Grasshopper, which are called Bumblebee and
yeah,
Ladybug,
yep.
which are also very popular among architects and environmental designers,
Yeah.
from
Uh,
my knowledge.
I think it's really interesting, although it does require quite a lot of work to actually be familiar with all the stuff that it can do. And I think it's also really important to know kind of what goes into the calculation, so it's not just a black box simulation that you do, because then you don't really know what are the parameters that you are calculating with. And yeah, I haven't used them either, mostly because very, very complicated to get into, and I haven't had time to actually do that. But also because it's a bit more of a specialist role, for me at least. It seems. So you would maybe
Of
have one
course.
person who are able to do it, and then you could do a design and put it through that person, and then you know.
And maybe you could be in the future when you're building a project, let's say the partner on the side of your office with the engineers, because of course your knowledge for push the possibilities of engineering are
Yeah.
more with a
Um,
bigger expertise.
Yeah, I mean, we do have really good collaborations with engineers, different companies for different projects, which is also, I think it's a good thing to work with different engineers on the different projects, also so that you can get a different view on things maybe. And there's been this trend in Denmark, at least, that a lot of the big architects have been bought up by really big consulting houses, and of course I can see the benefits from that, but it's also, I think, maybe a bit restrictive on the architectural freedom, you could say, when they are owned by an engineer. I don't know if you have any experience with that.
Not here in Germany.
No.
Not here in Germany. No, I haven't. Here, there are different sizes of companies, but I've never heard about. I've heard about companies which have been bought by other big, very big structures which are for integrated planning, then this knowledge of this architectural office flows into a bigger entity which makes integrated planning, which means architecture and all the aspect of the building engineering. But
I think that it's really easy for an architecture company, if it gets bought by a really big consultancy, is I think it's hard to keep your integrity as a sort of creative entity within a big engineering company. You know what I mean? They need to be really careful.
It depends. It depends.
Of course it depends.
But I think that the owners of those architectural companies gets a lot of money, so they think,
yes,
okay,
and then they do.
I can retire here.
So I think I can understand why they do it, because and also I can understand why the consulting engineers want to have architects in-house, because I think it's easier for them to control them in a sense. But I do think that it is really easy to lose quite a lot of the actual architecture in that process. So we are one of the last ones that haven't the bigger ones that haven't been bought. And for us, that is definitely a strategy to remain without sort of being bought. So
and be more creative, be more
exactly. And then you can also team up with engineers as you see fit on the project. So you can have different engineers for different kinds of projects. So and also for being able to work across borders, I think it's also a really good thing. So they have quite a bit of integrity, these architects that I work with. So I find that really interesting, actually. I have a lot of respect for what they can do. Also because I have no chance of doing what they do, because they're really, really very, very good at seeing stuff that is just sort of invisible for me, but then I can see it in the end result, So it's really fascinating.
I can hear that the choice in the middle of the pandemic you made was the right one, and I'm very happy to hear that you sound happy and that you're giving a big help for better architecture up there in Denmark.
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much, because you're one of my guests, which I found through LinkedIn. So we didn't know each other personally, and for accepting my invitation on the show.
Yeah.
The chat with you was very pleasant, and I've learned a lot about the environmental process in your firm and in Denmark in general, and the way you think. So thank you, and you can give a little shout out to where people can find more about you if they're curious, or about the company you work at.
Yeah, I think they should definitely check out ART's homepage, which is aart.dk. Just look into what we do with social sustainability for sure, and then also our really cool projects, because we have quite a lot of different projects as well, which is really interesting. So I hope everyone will check us out. And of course, you can always look me up on LinkedIn or whatever, and throw me a message. That you're always welcome to do that. So it's been a pleasure to talking to you.
No, thank you. Yeah, it was a big pleasure. I'm sure that the listeners will enjoy this chat. It was very pleasant. And I want to suggest to everybody who listens that all the links will be in the description. And if they want to support the podcast and the community around it to make it bigger, just go on the different social media pages and follow and get in touch also with me or give me feedback. So thank you, Stephanie, and have a good rest of the evening.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.